Today's reading comes from the book of James, chapter 1. Every desirable and beneficial gift, I'm reading from the Message version, by the way. Every desirable and beneficial gift comes out of heaven. The gifts are rivers of light cascading down from the Father of light. There is nothing deceitful in God, nothing two-faced, nothing fickle. He brought us to life using the true word, showing us off as the crown of all his creatures. Post this at all the intersections, dear friends. Lead with your ears. Follow up with your tongue. And let anger straggle along in the rear. God's righteousness doesn't grow from human anger, so throw all spoiled virtue and cancerous evil in the garbage. In simple humility, let our gardener, God, landscape you with the word, making a salvation garden of your life. Don't fool yourself into thinking that you are a listener when you are anything but, letting the word go in one ear and out the other. Act on what you hear. Those who hear and don't act are like those who glance in the mirror, walk away, and 2 minutes later have no idea who they are or what they look like. But whoever catches a glimpse of the revealed counsel of God, the free life, even out of the corner of his eye, and sticks with it, is no distracted scatterbrain, but a man or woman of action. That person will find delight and affirmation in the action. Anyone who sets himself up as righteous by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is not air, and only hot air. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out to the homeless and loveless in their plight, and guard against corruption from the godless world. So this book of James, it's considered a letter, one of the epistles. It's not really a letter. It's not addressed to anybody, maybe the entire church, but in form, they consider it a letter. Written by most likely James, the brother of Jesus, around the year 50 AD. And it ended up being the catalyst for the Jews rising up against the Romans during the revolt of the Maccabees and all of these revolts that started to happen against Rome. So it was a catalyst to ignite the people into action, to not just hope for something to happen, but to actually get off their rear ends and do something. See, Martin Luther didn't like this. This was his least favorite book of the Bible because he said that James was going against Paul and the idea that everything happened from faith and not from works. You see, Paul and James, they did have a lot of battles. There were a lot of consternation that existed between Peter and Paul and James in the early church. And as James was in Jerusalem, he would often call Paul or Peter back and say, "Why the heck are you out there telling the people this stuff? This isn't what we're supposed to do." Right? And so the book of James was kind of a handbook or a manual for saying, how do we accept all of these Gentiles into the church? Yeah, we are Jews for Jesus, so to speak, but what about all the Gentiles who never followed all of the rituals and rites and the rules of the Jews? What are we supposed to do with them? And finally James said, you know what? Forget it. Those things don't matter nearly as much as what the people are doing in relation to one another. So that's the whole gist of the book of James. Yesterday I was watching McCain's funeral in the morning. A lot of great speeches. I felt bad for the pastor. That dude had to get up there and say his piece and sit down and watch the real orators get up and do their thing. I was like, man, I would just not even talk at all. And during Obama's eulogy of McCain, he mentioned a quote from McCain's favorite book, right? For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. And For Whom the Bell Tolls, of course, is based on that quote from John Donne. Don't ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And so Obama went on to state this quote that the main character, Robert Jordan, was talking about as they're preparing to set the dynamite on the bridge and blow it up, and he's waxing philosophical as they were sitting there at night drinking and planning and what they were going to do in this war. And he said, today is only one day in all the days that will ever be. But what will happen in all the other days that ever come can depend on what you do today. I ask myself if it really matters what we do. I mean, as individuals, our impact is so minute. Even as a small congregation, I don't know that it really matters. In fact, even as a country, I mean, compared to all the people in the world, we're just a tiny fraction. So does it really matter what we're doing in relation to everybody else? And I think it's really easy to say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't matter so much. Except a couple of weeks ago, I met up with my friends. I told you how all of them lost their fathers in the past couple of months. So we got together to eulogize their fathers, so to speak, to memorialize them. And as I was sitting there waiting for my friend Scott to show up, there were two guys with funny accents talking off to my left. And eventually they turned to me and started talking and asking me what I do and what I think about this and that. And the first thing, of course, they asked is, what do you think about Trump? And that's how they opened the conversation, and I won't go into that here because we're in church, not in the political arena. But you can guess how the conversation went. And I was surprised by their remark. You see, Paul, who is sitting on the other side of Steve, Paul is from Namibia. A white dude with a British-ish accent from Namibia in Africa. And then next to him was Steve, who was born in New Zealand, of an Irish mother and British father, and they both now live in Dubai. They're pilots for Emirates Airlines. And as he was asking me what I think about Trump, I was thinking, okay, we're just making small talk. And then Steve said to me, he says, I want you to know that from the other side of the world, everybody is watching America and rooting for you. Because you are our hope. And if you can do it, then we know that we can do it. But if you don't, we feel like the whole world is doomed to failure. Are you serious right now? Are you serious? And then he asked me if I had hope. You asked me earlier if I was a glass half full or glass half empty kind of guy. I said, yeah, I have hope. I may or may not be optimistic in the particular moment, but I have hope that something's going to change, that something is going to be different. I have hope because when we read this passage, James tells us that there's this light, this word that exists in all of us, this power, this gift from God that's in every single one of us, even those that we disagree with. And that this gift can be used for amazing things. It's not something we have to go out searching for. It's not something that we have to strive to attain. It's something that's already there in the beginning. And James reminds us of this so clearly in saying that if you don't see it, if you forget it, it's like a person who goes in front of a mirror and after seeing your own reflection, walk away forgetting what you just see. Do we remember? Do we remember what our own faces look like, glowing in the image of God? Or have we as an entire country forgotten? Because we think it really doesn't matter what we do. It really doesn't matter what we do as an entire country because nobody really cares. We don't have any effect on anybody. But we know that's untrue. Steve and Paul made that very clear to me the other night. The world is watching. What we do does matter. Now, I'm not politicizing this, but one thing that amazed me about the McCain funeral is hearing all the stories of people around the world who chanted his name because he stood for liberty. Now, I may not agree with what side of the aisle he stood on when the roll call came up, but that didn't matter. He asked a Democratic president to eulogize him, a Democratic vice president to carry his body, a Russian dissident to carry his body. Right? The man stood for equality. We may not agree on all of his votes. He may not have been in the right place in the Palestinian-Israel conflict and debate. Right? But he realized that how we live our lives matters much more than what we say. And that's why his daughter stood up and said, he stood with heads of state. Henry Kissinger is here, eulogizing him. And none of that matters as much as what kind of father he was to her and her 3 brothers. His words meant this much. But his actions ultimately were the measure of what kind of man he was that made the most powerful people in the world stand up and honor him as a hero, not because of what he did in the Vietnam War, not because he spent 5.5 years in a POW camp in a tiny cell. That's not what made him a hero. It's how he treated human beings for the rest of them, including his own children. And James asks us, have we forgotten our own faces? Maybe. Maybe some of us have. James calls us to something else, though. He says, be slow to speak, right? Because your words don't matter as much as your actions. Be slow to anger. And what? Be quick to listen. To listen. What would it look like if we actually listened? We look from afar. The religious people that James warns about look and they make their judgments. Not with conversation, right? But they tout how righteous and how moral they are in the face of others who aren't as good, who don't stand up and meet up to their criteria. And they rebuke them. You should be holier. You should be more righteous. You should do things this way or that way. But they don't listen. What would it look like if the world listened to one another? What would it look like if we listened to the African American man who's in jail because his crime is that he's black and that he's an addict, while the white man goes to rehab? What if we listen to his story? What if we find out how we got there? What if we listen to the Native American who sits on a reservation that, contrary to our popular beliefs, was not founded by his forefathers because they were removed from their land by our ancestors and put there? And in the process taught that they were less than human. Taught that they were not good enough, that not only their vote didn't count, but neither did they. That they were not made in the image of God because they were not human like the rest of us. What if we listened? What if we heard their voice? What if we listened to the woman who doesn't have the earning power of a man? Maybe she's a widow. And what if we listen to her struggle as she says, I have to take care of my kids, but I feel like I have to be in this relationship with this man even though it's abusive because I can't afford to feed my kids if I don't. What if we listen? What if we listen to a child? Whether it's a child in a cage or the child who is told to not speak unless he's spoken to. What if we listen to a child and hear his or her dreams as a possible reality instead of something nonsensical, something that's just child's play that we have put aside because, we are so wise as to know what's possible and what is impossible? What if we were to listen? What if we were not only to listen, but what if we were to hear? What if we were listening to the gay man who finally got the right to marry the love of his life only to go into a cake shop to buy the wedding cake and be told, you can't buy your cake here, man. We don't have to sell it to you. What if we listened? And what if we went beyond listening and actually heard the words spoken from the hearts of people who looked in the mirror and did remember what they saw? Then we would take the first step towards not only being hearers, not only being speakers, but becoming doers of the word that James sets out right here. Because if we listen, and we really hear, then we have no choice but to do. Because that kindles a fire within us that's always been there, but that just adds fuel to this fire. That fire that Jeremiah spoke of. You remember that when Jeremiah was thrown in the pit and all his friends ridiculed him? And they said, man, why do you do this? Why do you go around preaching the Word of God when all we do is ridicule you and spit at you and throw you in a pit and kick rocks and dirt at you? And Jeremiah says to God, you see what happened? You see what happened, but you know what? I can't not do it because your Word is like a fire in my bones. And if I don't speak it, it will consume me. Words of one who saw his reflection and remembered what he saw. One who listened, but went beyond listening to hearing, to doing. And those who don't do, I would love to ridicule them. It's so easy to point my finger at them and call them lazy or overly righteous or overly moralistic or bitter or just darn mean. But when the fact of the matter comes, that anger that they carry with them against people that they don't understand, people that they're afraid to listen to, comes from just that. Fear. Fear of the unknown. Winston Churchill had it right when he said that if you gathered all the heads of state into one room, the only thing we would have is the sum of their fears. Fear. And so, somehow, that gives me a little bit of hope, a little bit of humility, a little bit of compassion for those who don't do the word, who only speak their own word. Because I look at them and I pity them because they live in a place of fear. We heard another quote yesterday in McCain's funeral. I don't remember who, maybe it was Lieberman, who was talking about the Teddy Roosevelt quote, right, in the arena. Right? It's not the critic who counts. It's not the one who sits there from the sidelines and ridicules, who never knew victory nor defeat. It's the one who's in the arena, who may be muddied and bloodied and scarred, but maybe having lost everything, but at least knows what it feels like to try. Those are the kinds of people that James is calling us to be. We may fail. Sometimes we will. But we can't not do. Why? Why don't people do? Because they feel fear. They feel inadequate. And that brings us all the way back to the quote that we had at the beginning. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us. It's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Friends, it's easy to point fingers. It's easy to get ticked off at those people who don't agree with us, who seem so callous. But let's remember, we have the same fears that they do. And today, it's time to put those fears aside. Today, it's time to go back to that mirror that we so fear looking into, and to look deeply and see, maybe for the first time, that image of God that burns within you like an eternal fire that cannot be quenched. To walk away from that mirror, remembering not only what you saw, but that which you were called to do. Amen.